Cool. Thank you, Tegan. Now, it's likely that I might double up on some of what Tegan has said in terms of my background on things. Doesn't matter. It's all going to help emphasize the message, which is pretty cool. All right. So, what we're going to talk about tonight is how you can sharpen your dive mind, which is really all about developing your brain. Your brain is the most useful, complicated, common tool that you take on every single dive, and yet very little dive training is actually dedicated to getting the most out of it. And that's kind of where this presentation is going to help change that. And we're going to do it tonight along the theme of looking at decisions, how we make them, the awareness, how we gain it, and how that's associated with making decisions, and then the communication between our divers, our environment, and how that feeds into improving that awareness to make those decisions. So we'll be linking those three together. And the whole point of doing that in general day to day or in diving life is to improve your performance, to increase your levels of safety, and to get you more enjoyment, have more fun under the water. The human diver is traditionally about human factors, as Tegan kind of said, and human factors from its origins in aviation, back in the 70s, is really about increasing safety in its pure form. However, I fully understand that most people find safety quite boring. And so I try and reframe what the human diver does along the lines of improving your performance, making you a better diver and a better teammate. You'll have more fun by doing that. And safety kind of happens as a byproduct. So that's kind of a different way of thinking about it. Tegan's given a little bit of introduction on me. I'll just go into a bit more detail just to try and fill in a bit of the blanks. So, why is this not working? That's typical. Now it's working. Who is Mike Mason? All right. So, my background, military flying. I spent 20 years in the Royal Air Force flying fighters, mostly like this one here on the top left. And then I spent the last 5 years in the Australian Air Force flying this aircraft here, the Hawk trainer down at RAF Base Williamtown, just near Newcastle. And I teach the next generation of fighter pilots their craft. I've also got a commercial flying license. My original plan back in leaving the Royal Air Force in 2020 was to go into commercial aviation. I'm sure you might remember this little thing called COVID, which kind of meant that the airlines weren't really recruiting then. So I ended up staying in the military and have been there kind of ever since. Now, what that means to you, and Tegan already kind of hinted at this, is that I've been living and breathing what we call human factors and non-technical skills for pretty much my entire professional career. It doesn't matter what aeroplanes you fly, how fast they go, how powerful their radars are, how far they can launch their missiles. What makes the difference, what really wins battles and wars is up here. It's what's in your brain, how you work with your teammates to achieve the outcomes you want to achieve. That's what makes the difference. From a diving point of view, I'm a qualified dive master. I work for a local dive shop down here in Port Stephens, where I often take the customers out to see the local grey nurse shark sites. I've done quite a lot of diving globally. The picture down here is in Iceland, the Sulphur Gap, and then I've dived as far south as New Zealand as well. Beyond dive mastering, in my own diving, I'm a tech diver. This is me here in Port Stephens with my rebreather, and I'm trying to do more of my own trimix diving off my own boat, just exploring more of the wrecks off New South Wales. I came across the human diver. I probably first came across it about 7 years ago, and I can't remember if it was Facebook or a website or whatever, but the message made sense to me because it was all the same concepts and ideas and methods that I'd been exposed to for, the previous 18 years of flying airplanes, but just using stories that weren't flying anymore. They were diving stories. And I thought, this is brilliant. This is awesome. This all makes sense to me. So I reached out to Gareth, the founder of the team, and I said, hey, this is me. This is my background. Love all this stuff. How can I get involved? And essentially, I joined the team, moved to Australia around the same time, and I've been the Australian kind of arm, as it were, of the human diver ever since. So, as Tegan says, I combine my background experience from military flying, instructing, supervising with my passion for diving to help bring the courses of the human diver and presentations for people like you. So that's what I'm all about. That's my background. Why are we here tonight then? I'm going to start with a story. So, for the screens, for the people I can see, show of hands, does anybody recognize this young lady? Doesn't matter if you don't, just curious. What about if I said her name was Linnea Mills? Does that ring any more bells? There's a hand going up. Now, Linnea Mills, as I tell the story, it might come a bit fresh in your memory because it does still crop up on social media even now. Linnea Mills was a 17-year-old girl from Montana, North America, and about 4 or so years ago, she's discovered diving. She's done her open water course and she loves it. She wants to do more. So she started her advanced course and she's done her first dive on her advanced course. She wants to go and do more, but she's a slight teenage girl. She wants to get a dry suit because diving in freshwater lakes in Montana in the winter is pretty cold, certainly a lot colder than it is up in Cairns. So she gets hold of a secondhand dry suit and she goes to the dive site at Glacier National Park with her buddy, her fellow students, instructors. There's a bit of a mishmash of people all together, and they're getting ready to go and do this dive. And it's getting later in the day. Time's getting on. The pressure's starting to build. And as Linnea gets kitted up into her dry suit, she gets her dry suit hose and finds that it won't actually connect to the dry suit nipple on her suit. The connections are incompatible, and it's like, oh damn. But the instructor says, oh, it's all right, don't worry about it. We're not going very deep, it won't matter for this dive. Now Linnea doesn't know what she doesn't know, says, okay, fine, I'll just get on with it, then that's okay. And they it appears they didn't do any body checks, certainly nothing particularly thorough. And because it's Linnea's first dive in a dry suit, she's massively overweighted, like massively. She's got something like 40 pounds, 20 kilos of lead in, I think some of it was in removable pockets, but some of it's just kind of in her BC pockets. Some of it's in her dry suit pockets. And so she's very overweighted. They get in the water. There's some actual GoPro footage of what happened, and there is footage of her on a ledge, I think in around sort of 7 or 8 meters, and she's obviously struggling a little bit. She's quite shrink wrapped in this dry suit, not very comfortable, and she ends up falling off this ledge into deeper water. And the buddy goes down after her, gets hold of the top of her BC, and he starts to inflate his own wing. He's inflating her wing, but he just can't overcome the amount of weight that's in Linnea's suit and BC. And eventually he's just forced to let go. And he just pops to the surface like a cork. She disappears down below, and they find her body about 3 hours later, having gone through what would have been an awful, agonizing, lonely way to die. Now, I tell this story because there was nothing technically wrong with any of the equipment. There was no malfunctions. Yes, the dry suit hose was incompatible, but there's no reason to think they weren't actually, functioning correctly. The problem or the problems with this particular case are all about the human side of what happened. And it's quite easy to say that there are plenty of flawed decisions in this whole situation. And the vast majority of those, if not all of them, were made due to inaccurate situation awareness. And that in turn is often fed by ineffective communication. Simple example, when the buddy finally went down to grab Linnea just before he let go of her, his decision was to try and just inflate her wing and his wing to try and get back to the surface. He didn't decide to try and get the lead out of her pockets because he didn't have the awareness of where it was because they hadn't communicated that in the pre-dive brief. So that kind of shows how it all links together. And that's just one example. There's obviously quite a few examples in this story. So let's break those three areas down now, and we'll start with decision making. So another quick show of hands. Who thinks that most of the decisions we make are logical, deliberate, conscious choices? Anybody reckon that's the go? You've got some shaking heads. Good, that's the right answer. Well done. We're learning. This is cool. So the statistics and the research suggest that only about 1 in 20 of the decisions we make in life in general or diving or whatever are logical or rational or considered. And this is because as humans, we are hardwired to be efficient. We don't like spending time and putting deliberate thought into things. It takes energy, and we don't like doing that. We're not naturally inclined to do so. Now, the problem is that then, therefore, we often make decisions based on assumptions, and those assumptions are very heavily influenced by what we call bias. Now, we talk about bias quite a lot, and if you go on Wikipedia, there's a page there that I think lists something like 200 or so different biases that have been identified by psychologists and researchers, and they really do affect us all the time on how we decide things, how we choose things, and certainly how we judge things as well. There's three I'll pick out now that come into diving. The first one, quite aptly titled for diving, is anchoring bias, and that really can affect things before we get in the water. Now, let's say that during the plan or the brief, you've been told that the current is going to be pretty mild. Now, what that means is that you're going to anchor all your future decisions based on that information, and you're less likely to accept but bits of different information in the future that contradict that original anchor. So you get in the water, and there'll be signs there that the current's perhaps stronger than you expect, but you're more likely to ignore those because of anchoring bias. Now, then, during the dive, you might have what we call planned continuation bias. And this is where you want to try and achieve the goals and the aims that you've set, really common in flying as well. And it could be that you want to go and do, I don't know, 2 laps of the Yongala, or you might want to get to a certain point on the reef or something like that. And because you've got this plan in mind of where you want to get to, you are naturally going to try and achieve that plan. And you're more likely to discount bits of information that maybe suggest that's not the best decision to actually make at the time. If the current is stronger than expected, for example, that suggests you don't want to keep going, but you're more likely to do so just because you've got this plan that you want to continue on. And on the same theme, post dive, we have this thing called hindsight bias. And hindsight bias is where we believe that things were much more obviously going to happen, or the outcomes were much more obvious than they were at the time when people made the associated decisions. So let's say this current's now really strong and you're working so hard that you actually run low on gas and you have to surface a long way from the boat and people have to come and get you. And somebody might say, it was obvious that was going to happen. It was only obvious in hindsight. At the time, it wouldn't have been that obvious. Otherwise, it wouldn't have happened. So hindsight bias is really powerful and certainly something to be aware of when we're judging outcomes afterwards. Decision making is heavily influenced by stress. The more stressed we become, especially when things start to go wrong underwater, as they sometimes do, then we will naturally resort to what we call preferred behaviors. And that in turn means we're more likely to use our biases and make assumptions to try and get what we want. And that can have obviously associated shortcuts and we won't communicate as effectively and things can start going wrong. Blah, blah, blah. The more you can reduce your stresses, either by sharing problems, removing them in the first place, discussing it as a team, the more likely you are to make better decisions. And when something does go wrong, we want to look at the people's decision making or decisions that were made at the time. It's really important to consider what we call local rationality. Invariably, what happens when things don't go well is we'll ask, why did you do that? Now, the thing is, people at the time are generally making what they consider to be appropriate, logical, or appropriate good decisions. We don't get in the water with intention of drowning. We don't get in the water with the intention of getting decompression sickness. We don't get in the water knowing we're going to get lost. We don't get in the water knowing we're going to get tangled or mess up a drill or whatever. We're making decisions based on our previous experience, and they're going to make sense to us at the time to some extent or the other. So when we try and look back on things and try and work out what decisions could have been made or should have been made, look at the local rationality of the people that were involved. Really, really important and quite difficult to do, but important to try and get the conversations going. Now, a really key takeaway with decision making is the quality of the decision that you make largely depends on your levels of situation awareness. Big subject, situation awareness. I'm just going to break it down into how we kind of try and define it within the human diver. First of all, there's perception. And perception is just raw information coming into your senses. What you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you feel, just raw information. Now, what we do with that information is to do with comprehension. What does that mean to me right now? And then what separates novices from experts is being able to quickly and accurately project what's going to happen in the future. I've comprehended what's going to happen now. I need to project what's going to happen in the future. Really simple example. You've done a dive out on a reef or in the deep blue, and you're holding a decompression stop or a safety stop, and you haven't got any visual references, and you can feel your ears starting to pop. That's your perception that the pressure is changing. The comprehension of that means that the chances are you are getting shallower, and then projecting into the future. If you've got a decompression overhead, or you just want to make sure you complete your safety stop, you have to dump some air out of your wing, descend back down, stabilize, put some gas back in, and then take it from there. So you're perceiving that your ears are popping. You're comprehending that means you're getting shallower, and you're projecting you need to do something about that before it gets any worse. Simple example of perception, comprehension, and projection. That's all well and good. How does this actually feed into our decision making? Well, you need to consider that if you don't notice something in the first place, or you don't perceive it, or you don't comprehend what it means, then we can't really be surprised when people don't necessarily make the appropriate decisions. So let's say you get in on a reef and there's a little bit of slow current. And if it's just really, really gradual and you're just drifting along and you're not putting any energy in, you're not necessarily going to notice it. And just around the corner, the current might pick up. But if you've got no signs to look for, you might not recognize that. But what you might notice is lots of fish, and instead of where the current's quite slack, they're all swimming all over the place. In this particular place where you can see up ahead, the fish are all facing in the same direction. And you go, that's a bit weird. But actually, with a bit of knowledge and experience, you can comprehend those fish are all swimming hard into current. I need to do something about this now because I either want to get there and keep going and not come back, or I don't want to get there because I can't come back. So that's kind of what it's that's noticing and comprehending a clue that you might not always recognize straight away, especially novice divers. Now let's talk about some things that can break down our situation awareness. And just for clarity, sorry, SA is situation awareness. First of all, photography. Right, another show of hands. Who's a photographer here? There's got to be more than one. I know that. Now, don't get me wrong, photography is cool. Underwater photography is awesome. Some of the technology and the pictures that people get these days is amazing. It's brilliant. However, at the same time, when you're taking a photo and you're staring at this little screen, your entire awareness bubble just shrinks down to that little screen. You're going to lose sight of your buddy. You might be drifting down. You might be drifting along with the current. Who knows? But you get so focused that your situation awareness breaks down. It's not necessarily a problem, especially if it's discussed during a planning and a brief, but it can be an issue because you are going to get task focused. Miscommunication. Now, this can be a sign and a symptom that situation awareness is broken down, especially if stress is there, because when we get stressed, we tend to reduce our levels of communication or our detail in communication and assume that people are kind of understanding the message. But one thing I really try and encourage here is with hand signals, no matter how simple they are, it's really important, I think, to actually repeat back the hand signal that either you're giving or that you're receiving from somebody else. Even if it's a case of you're thumbing the dive because you want to ascend, you've had enough, or you've run out of gas. If somebody gives you an okay, I want them to actually acknowledge that we're thumbing the dive because there's been plenty of examples of where you thumb the dive, somebody says okay, then you ascend, they're still down there because they were actually saying okay to somebody else. They haven't got the signal. So closing that communication loop is really quite important. And another one I'll talk about is distraction. Now we're naturally prone to getting distracted. Not necessarily a bad thing. Dive computers now will flash lots of colors. They will potentially make sound. They'll vibrate to try and distract you into telling you what's going on. But distraction has its issues as well. You're about to check your gas or have a look at your buddy or take a picture or something, and all of a sudden you see a fish or a shark just down below you, and you think, oh, that's cool. I'm distracted by that. I'm now going to have a look at that for a minute. And then before you realize it, you've descended 5 meters, potentially below the max operating depth of your gas. You can't see your buddy anymore. Distraction can be a real factor. And these can manifest in all shapes and forms. I took a group diving probably about 3 years ago now, and it was in Port Stevens. It was after we'd had some rain runoff, so it was quite dark when we were down at sort of 14 meters or so. And all the group, I think it was a group of 4 or 5, they all had torches to look under the looks and crannies, but I didn't brief them about torch discipline. And underwater, it was like a Star Wars kind of knife fight in a phone box with these lightsabers going everywhere. And I'm just going, what is going on? Distracted, like on steroids with all these people with their torches because I hadn't talked about it in the first place. So a kind of self-induced, but an unforeseen issue with distraction. So speaking of distraction and task focus, let's have a look at this video and then we'll talk a bit about it at the end.
The monkey business illusion.
Can you hear that, Tegan? Just give us a thumbs up. Yep.
Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half miss the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it, but did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, And there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion. Learn more about this illusion and the original gorilla experiment at theinvisiblegorilla.com.
Cool. That video is an awesome little learning tool, I find. Theinvisiblegorilla.com and the book, The Invisible Gorilla, are fascinating. Some of the stuff that the researchers came up with and proved is really quite eye-opening, to be honest. Now, that video is great because a lot of people have seen this sort of thing before and they go, a gorilla's going to walk across. And they see the gorilla and just go, brilliant, nailed it, seen the gorilla, I'm awesome. And then at the end, it's like, did you see the curtain? What curtain? Did you see the black player going off the screen? Oh, this is the problem with task focus. And this is the problem with being distracted by something potentially that you're looking for is that you miss other things. So one thing I really try and get across after showing people this video is if you're in a team, certainly if you're in a team of more than two and there's a problem going on, you want somebody to be able to stand back and keep the bigger picture and make sure that you're not descending or drifting or sort of moving apart or whatever. It's really important for somebody to try and avoid getting task focused to avoid things like that actually happening. Pretty cool video. So that's a few things about situation awareness and some issues with it. Let's talk about some ways that you can build it, maintain it, and regain it, which is what a lot of this is going to be about. First of all, planning and briefing. Not something that is done perhaps as thoroughly as people would like, I think, a lot of the time. I'm sure we'd agree. And it doesn't have to be War and Peace. You know, the clue of the word brief is in the title. It's supposed to be brief, but you've got to tailor it to the audience that you're dealing with, obviously. And it can just be as simple as talking about what do people want to get out of the dive? Do people want to practice a certain skill? Do they want to see a certain type of fish? Do they want to achieve a certain depth? Who's leading the dive underwater? So what kind of formation do you want to have? We want to do some checks. And that's going to involve things like making sure that you know or your own equipment is set up properly, that you've got your dry suit hose connected. Plenty of times when people get in the water when they haven't got a dry suit hose connected. I'm sorry, I know it's Cairns. You probably haven't got many dry suit divers up there, but down here it's a big deal. But those kind of things are obviously quite important. Releasing your weights, making sure your teammates know how to get you out of your gear and you get them out of their gear, how you can access their gas, and so on and so forth. Oh, someone's drawing on my slide. Didn't realize you could do that. How much gas have people got? So it's really important to have an awareness of that at the start because it's quite often that people might have, I don't know, 20 bar less than you. And if you know that at the start, then 20 minutes into the dive, when they're 20 bar down, that's not a surprise. It's not a shock to your situation awareness. You were expecting it and you saw it coming. Keep scanning, keep looking around, and build that into a habit pattern. Really good idea just to keep, looking at your team every 30 seconds or so, checking your gas, checking your depth, and over time you'll find that you'll be able to predict how much gas you're going to have when you check it in say 5 minutes. You can actually still think, right, I reckon I'll have 160 bar now. Yep, 160 bar. My awareness is good. Regular communication. Now, this doesn't have to be constantly checking that everybody is okay and getting the hand signal back. If you're with a team that's experienced, that you dive with a lot, you can just look at them. And as long as they kind of look okay or exchange a glance, that's fine. That's all it needs to be. It doesn't have to be constantly repeating hand signals. Verifying information. This is quite a useful one, I think, and not something that's done particularly often to try and maintain situation awareness amongst the team. And I'll give you an example that I did in action at Stradbroke Island about 2 months ago. Three of us doing a dive on a site that I'd done before about a year previously. But there was no dive master with us. They said, okay, guys, you've done 3 dives this weekend. Go and do this one on your own. And it was like, well, okay, fine. They gave us obviously a site brief and stuff. But I still wanted to make sure that we didn't get too far away from the shot line and we didn't get lost, et cetera, et cetera. And we came up with a plan that between the three of us, what I would do is periodically during the dive, I'd just say, okay, guys, I'd just give them the boat hand signal, and I wanted them to point in the direction that they thought the shot line was. The idea being that if they think the shot line's over there, but I think it's over there, somewhere situation awareness has broken down, and we could find ourselves getting lost. We need to figure out what's happened and actually work out where the shot line is. And also, the other added effect you've got on that is that if you know that people, or if you tell people that they're going to be, let's call it quizzed underwater as to where the boat is, they're far more likely to pay attention to what's going on. I'm sure we've all been guilty. I know I certainly have of somebody else leading and you just go, ah, fine, whatever, don't care. And you don't pay any attention. Leader gets lost and you're now a bit screwed. So it's quite a good idea to come up with ideas like that to verify your own understanding and that of your teams. And after our dives, having a debrief, piecing it all together, working out what everybody else's point of view was on the dive. And it is not necessarily to be done only when things go wrong. Debriefing is also really useful to talk about things that went well, because if you can work out what went well, and more importantly, why it went well, you can repeat that and you can share those lessons between other people. If things didn't go so well, things can be improved. Then okay, look at fixes. What can you implement? What can you take forward? What can you use in the future? And the idea is that if you imagine you kind of start here and on the dive, you plan and you brief. Your awareness is up here, and then you execute the dive and you debrief it, then your awareness gets to here. And then for future dives, you already got a head start. If you don't plan and brief and you don't debrief, then the learning's pretty limited and your learning curve just goes up like this. So that's the difference. Planning and briefing and debriefing, not planning and briefing or debriefing. That's the real difference between learning curves. And that's why I think it's so important to have a debrief. So that's situation awareness. We've talked about how that in turn is fed by communication. Now, there are barriers to communication, and this slide here, or this image here, really sums it up quite nicely for me. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it's taken place. So often, we will transmit a message, whether it be hand signals or verbally or written or whatever, and we will assume that that message has been interpreted in the way we want it to be. And often that is not quite the case. So what barriers have we got? Physical barriers, obvious one, we're underwater. We have limited hand signals unless you speak sign language. We've got wet notes or slates, but again, they're quite clunky and it's difficult to have a detailed conversation. So there are barriers to communication in diving. We've talked about stress already in decision making, but it's important to consider how it's a barrier to effective communication as well. When we're stressed or we might be task focused, then we will naturally make our communication more succinct. We'll make more assumptions that the person receiving our message knows what we're trying to get across. So stress is going to break down communication. Language. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean English being your first language or not. It can mean, just lingo between recreational, technical, cave, or whatever. A really interesting one I had a few years ago with a group on the boat that I was diving off Port Stevens. I was talking to them about DSMBs, and they kind of were giving me funny looks and said, "What's a DSMB?" Until one of them said, "Oh, it's a safety sausage," and I was like, "Right, okay." I was quite fascinated almost that people knew the term safety sausage, didn't know DSMB, but there you go. That's a good example of how people have common language in their own little cliques. It's really, really quite normal. Culture. The diving industry is quite egocentric, I think, in my experience, as an average overall, not everywhere, but certainly as an average. And that naturally leads to people being reluctant to put their hand up and ask questions and actually get conversations going because of personal factors. They don't want to look stupid. They're afraid of retribution. And this is a real limiting thing on social media. If you put a story on social media about a lesson you've learned, a mistake that you've made, and you want to try and get opinions or thoughts or talk about the lessons that you learned yourself, and you'll have seen it yourselves on social media, the trolls come out, they tell you how stupid you are and you're an idiot and you need to go and hide in a corner for the rest of your life. And it just doesn't help. And therefore, we don't like sharing those stories. It's a real issue. Let's watch another little video that talks about the problem with poor communication.
We're out here now, man. I hope you're happy.
Yeah, I'm happy.
Well, good. Now what?
Well, I just think we should have wheels on our safety vests.
Oh, come on, man. Those vests are for daggone people who really like to use them. The deer don't even see them. They're colorblind, stupid. Golly. Oh. Hey, Tiny, did you get something? Tiny, what'd you get? Tiny! Tiny, oh my God!
911, what is your emergency, please?
Yes, please help us. I think he's dead. What do I do?
Sir, calm down. I can help you. We'll walk through this together. First, I need you to make sure he's dead.
Well, I can do that. Hold on a second. He's dead. Now what?
Not so much what we say, it's the way we say it. Really, really important. So we talked about some barriers. Let's talk about some enablers to facilitate effective communication. First one, really, really important for people in a leadership role generally to demonstrate is vulnerability. Now, if you haven't seen this term in this concept, or this context rather, vulnerability is where leaders will talk about mistakes they've made. They will open up to lessons learned. They are showing they're being vulnerable and showing that they're human, they're fallible, they can make mistakes. And that in turn encourages other people to make mistakes. And you'd be amazed at how powerful that is if you're in a position of authority to demonstrate that vulnerability. Throughout my 25 years of flying and slightly fewer years of diving, by far the most credible pilots and divers that I've worked with are those who put their hands up after a flight or a dive and they say, today, I made a mistake here, here, here. And the weight just falls off your shoulders as you think, oh, thank God, they make mistakes. Now I can put my hand up and talk about my mistakes as well, and we can all learn. Vulnerability is really, really powerful. And it's not necessarily for instructors or dive masters. If you're an advanced diver, an advanced open water diver with, let's call it 10 dives to your name, and you are on a boat with an open water diver, they will look up to you as being more experienced than them. You are in a leadership position, even though you may not think you are. So it's amazing how quickly you can adopt that kind of role, perhaps. When we are communicating, put in pauses, certainly in planning and briefing, especially in the instructional role. And the key thing is the pause has to be appropriate. If it's a brand new group of open water divers, first ocean dive, the pauses need to be quite long between every single step. And the idea is that you can introduce those pauses, look around at people's body language, make sure the message has got across, and then carry on. Now, if it's with a group of people you dive with a lot and it's fairly standard, then you can probably rattle through things quite quickly and only pause for things that are different, things that are unusual, things that are potentially risky, where you actually need to make sure that the emphasis is on that information that it's got across. This is quite an easy one, but quite an effective one as well. When you're at the end of a brief, rather than saying, do you have any questions? Say, what questions do you have? Now, you're getting the same kind of intent across, but if you say, do you have any questions? People will invariably, unless they feel really comfortable, they'll say, no, no questions, even if they may actually have some questions, especially if we're with a group of strangers. But if you say, what questions do you have? That kind of implies that you may have said something wrong. You may have had a misspeak. You may have missed something altogether. Therefore, what did I miss? What else do I need to share with you so we've all got the same awareness? Really it's a subtle difference, but really quite powerful. And when we do ask our questions, open questions are the way to go, certainly with checking understanding. So let's say and just for clarity, a closed question is a question that requires a single word or a yes or no answer. So let's say you've briefed your team that we're going to go down the anchor line, we'll meet on the seabed, and then we'll have 3 pairs of divers, and we're going to go off and then explore the reef in a formation of pair number 1, pair number 2, pair number 3. Now, if I say to a diver in pair number 2, okay, do you understand the plan when we get to the bottom of the anchor? They're probably going to go, yep, I understand the plan. And then you've kind of got nowhere to go. Whereas if you ask an open question, you could say, okay, can you explain to me what's going to happen when we get to the bottom of the anchor line? Then they have to actually explain in their own words what they understand the situation to be. Okay, I'm in the middle pair, so you're going to go off first, then me and my buddy will follow you next, and then the other 2 will follow behind. Brilliant, that's the answer you want. Now, what's critical with this technique, though, is that if you ask an open question or even a closed question and you don't get the answer you want, it's more likely that you haven't explained it very well in the first place. So it's critical to refer back to vulnerability and apologize and say, do you know what, I probably didn't explain that very well. Here it is again. What else did I miss? So open questions are really, really useful in terms of enabling effective communication and checking understanding. All right. I've been talking for about 35 minutes, I think. Let's summarize all that. Effective communication is kind of not necessarily where it starts, but it's a big part of it. That will feed into having good awareness of the situation. Good awareness of the situation enables you to make better decisions. And if we're better at making decisions in general, that leads to improved performance, increased safety, and more enjoyment. What I would say is that we've been talking for, let's call it 35 minutes. We've definitely only just scratched the surface, as it were. There's an awful lot to this topic. And if you do want to know any more, I don't want this next slide to be a sales pitch. That's not my intent. But please feel free to go and have a look at thehumandiver.com. Lots of stuff on there. It talks about the courses we offer. There's the Essentials class, which is about 4 hours of pre-recorded material kind of delivered in bite-sized chunks just to get a baseline of the concepts. And that's kind of a one-off fee. And then you've got lifetime access. There's the masterclass, which is 10 2-hour webinars, one webinar a week for 10 weeks with some homework in between. And that goes into a lot more detail on the theory. So, for example, tonight I've talked about situation awareness for about 6 or 7 minutes, including videos. The masterclass will talk about it for about an hour and a half and then have some questions. Lots of discussion, lots of reflection, really going into the details to try and get the knowledge out of it that you can. And then the applied class, this is the one that Tegan was talking about that I came up to Cairns to do in April. That's 2 days full time, generally over a weekend. And that's a much more experiential class where there's a bit of theory, lots of discussion because everybody's kind of in the same room, which is really cool to share lots of learning and stories. But as Tegan says, you get lots of practical ideas because we use a computer simulation program to get you into a situation that you might find quite stressful, but you have to communicate as a team. You have to work, therefore, as a team to improve your situation awareness to make the right sort of decisions. And it's all based on how you behave under pressure and how you interact with others. And you can take practical takeaways from that. We get a lot of practice at debriefing as well that you can then apply to your own diving. So really good fun. Like Tegan's done a good sales pitch at the start of the presentation. Thank you, Tegan. But feel free to ask her for more information offline. Beyond the courses, we've got loads of blogs. So we publish one of those a week and have been doing so for years. So there's well over 200 blogs now, and they will look at stories, case studies, and draw lessons out of those that you can then go and apply to your own diving. And then finally on the website is what we call what's called If Only. This is a documentary which was made about 6 years ago looking at a rebreather fatality in Hawaii through a human factors lens. And it's just trying to encourage you to just have a different viewpoint, basically. And when something goes wrong, we naturally instinctively try and blame an individual, a particular failure. But this documentary kind of unpicks all that and really does a good job of showing you all the other factors that are actually at play. So that's the website. If there's anything else you want to talk about, then come and talk to me. Whether it be on my address there, thehumandiveraustralia@gmail.com, or the Nautilus group. I've hopefully given the impression that I really enjoy all this stuff. I am genuinely passionate about what we do and about improving diver performance, safety, and enjoyment. So please feel free to reach out and ask questions and get a discussion going.